It's interesting because when you watch coaching conversations, most often a question like an observer would have would be like, why did the coach pick on that thread? Because the person will say three things, five things, whatever's on their mind, and the coach will be like, this path. And the person, and the observer will be like, why do you pick that path and not the other one? Like he said four other things. Why didn't you go down the other path? Right? How do you know this was the right path? And one of the challenges is you don't know whether that's the right path and you don't know what the is behind the other 4 doors. And so when I think about I sometimes think about that question of like, could they have gone down the other 4 paths too and told me like where they all lead? So that's like where it gets interesting for me is you can pick one path. And to your point, Mark, like a good coach has a high chance of picking the best door, but they don't always pick the best door. And so, can Gen AI help with that of being like, oh, maybe here's what the other options may have looked like, playing out the conversations.
Welcome to another episode of the Supra Insider podcast. In this episode, Ben and I were joined by Yue Zhao. Yue is a seasoned product executive turned exec coach. She has been a product leader at Thumbtack, Instagram, Meta, and Fuzzy, where she was the chief product and technology officer. In addition to coaching, she also teaches a Maven course and writes consistently in her newsletter, The Uncommon Exec. In this conversation, we went deep on what prompted Yue to move out of Silicon Valley, her transition from CPO to exec coach, and the different paths that she tested along the way. We also touched on why she wrote a book and the reframe that helped her finish it in just 4 months. And we also covered on some of the learnings from coaching product leaders for the last year. If you're a product leader considering potential paths beyond product, this episode is for you. Enjoy.
If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite podcasting app, follow us on Substack, give us a rating. It'll help us a ton and help future people discover us while also making sure you never miss an episode. Thank you.
Hi, Ben. Hi, Yue.
Hello. I was bugging Mark that we had to start recording because we could not help ourselves from diving in. So I'm excited for this.
Yeah, and some piece of content, Ben, that I can share with you is that the last time that I saw Yue was actually in Barcelona before Christmas break, because Yue lives there. I grew up there. So we actually grabbed coffee in a coffee shop that was like 5 minutes away from where I grew up, the apartment that I grew up with my parents, and Yue lives in that same neighborhood. So it was like a
I
really
live
cool.
5 minutes away from where Mark grew up. And it's amazing to meet somebody who's actually from there and grew up in the area because there's a good expat community in that area as well. So most of the people that I interact with regularly are expats. So when I met Mark, I was like, oh, I finally met somebody like
They exist.
homegrown.
How did you end up in Barcelona of all places?
Great question. So I was pretty much like grew up in the Bay Area. So I was born in China. When I was 10, we moved to the Bay Area and I pretty much grew up there from middle school, high school, Berkeley undergrad, just never left. Like San Francisco, first job out of college. And when I went to business school in Boston at Harvard, I wanted to leave the Bay Area for good. That was my goal. It's like leave the Bay Area, go to Boston, and then from Boston, never go back to San Francisco. I met my husband in business school. He is from Venezuela. He loves the Bay Area. He thinks the Bay Area is like the most amazing place on earth. And so when we decided to get married, he said, hey, what's best for our new family? And what was best for our new family was to move back to the Bay Area. So I ended up going back to the Bay Area, had an amazing career there, which we can go into. But I've always been the one to be like, can we move yet? Can we move yet? Can we go somewhere else yet? And I just never won that argument because our careers were both going really well. My parents were there. There was just a lot of reasons to stay until COVID-19 and the pandemic and everything went remote. My job was fully remote. He was working for a company in Europe. He was working Europe hours. from San Francisco, which is not fun.
Which is tough, yeah.
And so I made my final pitch of, hey, we should go somewhere. And because he's from Venezuela, we wanted to go to Spain. And it was Madrid or Barcelona, and I wanted to be close to the water still. So that's how we ended up in Barcelona.
And how long has it been now that you've been there?
It's been 2.5 years. So we were supposed to be here for 6 weeks over the summer to just kind of see like, hey, how does this work? Because we had 2 young kids. Like my younger one was 6 months and my older one was like 3. So we were like, okay, let's just see how this might work, whether we like this digital nomad type lifestyle. And then so we booked 6 weeks at an Airbnb, pretty close to actually where Mark grew up, in the area we're in today, because we didn't want to be in the super touristy areas. And by week 5, I was like, okay, so what visas do we need? How much is rent here? Do you think our companies will fire us if we like say like, hey, we're just gonna move to Barcelona? And so we went apartment hunting in week 5 and we found the place that we're currently in. We put the deposit, we called our bosses and said, hey, we're moving to Barcelona, but like actually nothing changes because we're still all over Zoom and we'll still travel. We need to travel. And yeah, and now it's been 2.5 years.
I mean, you worked at Fuzzy, which was the company that you were like the chief product technology officer for like a year or a year and a half. Then that's when
Yes.
you decided to.
So I was with Fuzzy when I moved. Because they were fully remote, essentially, I just shifted my work schedule so that I was working mostly Pacific hours. And then once a quarter, every like 6 weeks ish, we would have like a leadership get together, and then we would just fly to like New York or San Francisco if needed. So it was funny. The CEO, we actually decided we weren't going to tell anybody that I moved to Barcelona because he didn't want to open up a whole can of worms with a bunch of teens, right? Of like, hey, can we all move? And so I never told anybody. It just continued as is. And then one day, like 6 months in, I think he forgot. So during one of the all hands, he was like, hey, Yui's calling in from Barcelona. And everyone's like, why is Yui calling? I didn't want to lie and be like, hey, I'm only here on vacation. So that's when everybody found it. In this world where everyone is remote, it's actually very hard to tell where you're calling in from.
A fun story, Mark. I don't know if I told you this, but I think we might have been one of the very early Fuzzy customers when we got George in San Francisco in 2017. I actually just looked through my Gmail. I think one of my first checkup write-ups was August 2017 with George.
Wow.
And that was a magical service. I appreciate you playing a part in building that out. Yeah.
I was not there in 2017, so I will not take any of the credit, but I'm glad that they had good service.
It only got better.
They only got better.
And I think what's super interesting about like this journey is like you made 2 pretty bold moves in like the span of like probably like a year and a half. Like you decided first, like I want to move like away from the Bay Area where I've built this amazing career where probably like all the big tech companies are, right? And then if you want to leave Fuzzy, like it's probably gonna be hard to get back into tech world. And then also at some point too, you decided to leave, the product executive role for good and go into coaching and teaching courses full time. Like, yeah, can you walk me through like why did you decide that and how is that kind of decision making process in your head?
Yeah. I do think sort of one thing leads to the other, right? I do. And I don't know how it would have played out if I did stay in San Francisco and never moved. And it was much easier after Fuzzy to potentially get another product job, whether I would have taken the time to figure out whether there was something else. But because I was in Barcelona, when I was thinking about next steps, I talked to the companies here, like Personio, Travel Perk, the possibilities here. I talked to a bunch of folks in the Bay, but then I was like, do I really want to work the schedule of the evenings? And so I think it did sway me more being in Barcelona to say like, okay, what are other options that I'm not thinking about? What are other options that I wouldn't have considered? The cost of living here is a half to a third of the Bay Area, right? So that also made it a lot more feasible to say, okay, I'm not going to go for that next whatever high paying job in product. And so I think maybe it would have turned out differently if the move didn't happen and I wasn't like, hey, I want to stay here more than anything. It was always a possibility to say, okay, let's go back to the Bay because Yui got an amazing product job in the Bay, so we should move back. but it made it harder. It put a little extra resistance. And I think that resistance was what I needed to say, okay, let me just take a year. I gave myself a year to figure out if there's something else. And if there was, then maybe we go back to the Bay Area and I get another product job somewhere. And the market at the time also wasn't that great. Like,
Yeah.
there weren't really that many exciting things. AI was so new. Like, everybody was trying to figure out what was happening. So I think a combination of those factors really gave me the opportunity to say, okay, take the time to figure out what you really want to do, because there wasn't something in the back of my head being like, but you should just do that because that's awesome. Or it's like, here's another opportunity that also looks awesome. And I think when you have those things, it's actually just so much easier to be like, oh yeah, I'll take that next thing because that just looks like an amazing job. Why not? And it becomes a why not, then why do it? So I think that was a really important part of the equation. That said, I wasn't very good at not doing anything. I was supposed to take 6 months and just not do anything. And I think by month 2, I started writing my book. My husband was basically like, yeah, no, you like are not good at doing nothing. So you might as well do something. So
I've
that's
never
when I
understood
started
the
exploring.
I've never understood the do nothing thing, because it's actually impossible to go through the day doing that. Like, if I imagine someone literally doing nothing, what, just sitting on the couch watching Netflix or just laying in bed, that sounds a little like depressing to me personally.
Sure.
Like, it sounds like how a depressed person would behave. So when you told yourself you were going to do nothing in a positive, exciting way, what was the
Sure.
original intent? What did you think you'd be doing when you were doing nothing?
Yeah. So the original intent was to like catch up with friends, meet new people, learn about different industries, figure out, do a bit more pottery, get in shape, have a couple more coffees, maybe spend more time with my kids, but not try to move in some direction in the career standpoint. And so it was fill the other buckets in your life. And I like to do pottery. I like to do art, spend more time on those things, walk the dog for, an hour instead of 5 minutes, and just enjoying the environment a bit more. And it was really nice for about a month. And then I was like, no, I need to feel like I'm working on something or towards something. There's something I'm building. So, yeah.
Could I, sorry, Mark, I had a follow up there. Just because we talked about wanting to go a little deeper, and my curiosity is kind of
Mhm.
nudging me to go deep on this. Could you unpack a little bit of what that feeling was that made you, like, what was underneath the surface that made you say, I need to be doing more after a month? Was it a sense like I don't want to become irrelevant, I have a lot of big things I still want to accomplish in my life? Like, what was under the surface there?
I think at first glance, it feels a little bit like I want to be a productive member of society. So I guess the other thing to know is that when I started my career in product, my goal was always to be the chief product officer. That was like the end goal. And I remember in business school, they show you, I don't remember what class it was, but I remember there was a slide where they showed you like the CEO of a giant pharma company day in the life of. And I remember looking at that slide and being like, I never want that to be my day in the life of. It's just too crazy, too stressful, too many things going on. Don't want that. And so my goal for myself professionally has always been, the first thing I want to get to, or maybe for most people, they don't think of it as the first thing. I thought it was the first thing. The first destination was be the CPO of a like mid-ish sized company and see what it's like to sort of run an organization and a team, interface with the board. And I think when I did that at Fuzzy, it checked that box for me. So I also didn't have this is the next rung in the ladder, or this is the next thing I really wanted to do. Because sure, I could say, let me just run a bigger product team, or let me go to a different industry, or whatever it is. But it was never really like a personal goal. And so while it was an option, it was just an option. Not like, oh, I really want to do this. And in fact, I got the cherry on top of running engineering as well. So I was like, it is a bit more than what I asked for. And so that I think allowed me to say, okay, I might step away from this line of thinking and this trajectory. But when I sat and said, okay, I'm just going to spend time with my dog and my kids, and while that's nice, I think I just have this desire to build things. And I think it comes from being in product, where if I don't feel like I'm like making something worthwhile that's longer term than a day, an hour, or whatnot, then I don't find really meaning in what I'm doing. And so I needed that, like, what's the thing that I'm going to build that's longer lasting? Then, oh yeah, my kids are healthy and my dog is healthy, which is great, but it doesn't feel like I'm building something.
Yeah, I think that the way I think about this, like, do nothing period for me, it's less about not doing nothing. Like, I'm the same way. Like, I could not be in a couch all day. Like, I'm going to be exercising. I'm going to be reading, listening to podcasts, traveling. I think for me, it's more about like the mindset of like, for a given 2 months or 3 months, I'm not going to commit to anything. There's going to be like
Yeah.
opportunities that are going to fly my way, and I'm just going to let them pass because I'm not, because because I made a promise to myself that I'm not going to say yes to anything. I think that's where the valuable thing is, right? Because then it's like, I think the risk is that then you jump to the whatever comes your way and you just take it, but maybe that's not the best opportunity. So I think that to me is like the value of it, of just building a good intuition of here are all the different things that I could be doing. And then from that, then picking the one that aligns best with you. And I'm curious, is that something that, like, how did you figure out like what to do next right after those like initial 2 months? It sounds like you did a little bit of, you did a book, you maybe wrote more, but yeah, how did you think about that?
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that you were not going to say yes to anything. I think I did the opposite, which is I said yes to everything. I said yes to like things that I probably wouldn't have said yes to in the past, where if someone came to me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in helping out in our early stage venture?" And I think for the last 15 years, I was like, no, I would never go into venture for XYZ reasons. And I said, yes. I was like, sure, why not? Let me try it. If you guys are willing to take a chance on me, I'll take a chance on trying it. Turned out to be not for me. I'm sure it is for somebody, just didn't fit my set of strengths and what I was looking for.
By the way,
I
do you recommend
yeah,
like now, like looking in hindsight, do you recommend that approach of like saying yes to all these different things?
I think it depends on the person a bit. I have a bit of a I'm an Enneagram 7. I don't know if you guys know what your Enneagrams are.
Is that like the visionary? Is that?
It's a one where we like new things. We like to like new experiences, types of things. We get bored easily. Like, we're always looking for things. So for me, it's fun and interesting to like jump into an environment I've never been in, like investing in early stage healthcare in Barcelona. Know nothing about it. Let's figure it out. But I don't think that's for everyone. I think, there are people who are on the opposite end of that spectrum who like structure and plans and some certainty and want to go in, all things considered. But for me, I also learn by doing. And so unless I'm really in it and trying it, sometimes it's hard for me to imagine what it might be like and say, oh, do I want this or not? So I had the luxury of time. I had the luxury of being able to spend it how I'd like. So I was like, hey, for me, the approach of trying things worked. But I think for others, sometimes it's a bit more, let me do more research, let me talk to more people, let me consider this and figure out what those plans might look like. And then let me, actually do the doing.
One
Yeah,
of the things I like,
that's me.
that's a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but Mark, I would also say that if I look at how you showed up for starting this podcast together, you had a very experimental mindset. You didn't overthink it. You didn't try to get it perfect. So there's also a part of you, I think, that is a tinkerer that likes to try things and learn by doing. So you probably have a little bit of both.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that the podcast is interesting. I think the podcast is something that I wanted it to do. And I think the downside of kind of being very intentional, planning everything, is that the activation energy to start doing something is really high. So I knew that like for these, I just needed to get momentum of just get started. I knew that it would just take care of itself over time, which I think it's like a lesson that I've learned over time to how to almost supplement this strong side of my personality.
Yeah. Yes. For someone to pull you out of the planning phase, to actually pull you across the activation to doing and say, okay, like we did all this planning, but now we just need to put something there and see what happens.
Yeah. It's just really hard to start things or get started on things if you don't get really good at it. Okay, like just try the first thing.
That's probably why we work well together. Is I probably over-index on the side of let's just do it and get it out and figure it out as we go. And I think that probably got both of us to get this thing off the ground. And then I think your strength relative to me, I think in keeping it going and the consistency and the rigor is super helpful for me because I feel social accountability to you that if I don't carry my weight on a weekly basis, I'll be like letting you down. And so you're very good. I think there's a nice balance in the partnership in that sense. But I think what you're saying is spot on, Yue, is each person, I think, probably enters these exploration periods differently. And what ultimately pulls them into the next thing is different. And we talked a lot about that last time we had our chat.
Yeah. And it sounds like finding the right partner in this journey can also be really important, where if you tend to get stuck at a certain point, finding someone who can help you past that point with that sort of a different perspective or different take can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, I'm curious. So then it sounds like you tried a bunch of stuff, and then it sounds like you pretty quickly got an intuition of like, okay, like here, I like this, I don't like this. Did you also give yourself time to try things? Like how did that work? Yeah.
Yeah, I pretty much said I will try anything from 3 months to 6 months. It's because I knew that there was definitely the novelty period where it's new. At least for me, it's new, it's fun, it's something I haven't done. And that in of itself makes it interesting. But then from a long-term career standpoint, when it's not just like a fun thing you're trying and you start asking like, okay, what does the career look like? What am I going to be doing in 3 years? Then those answers become quite different. And so it took, for me, it usually took at least 3 months, if not 6 months, to really get a good sense for, okay, this is what it would feel like longer term. And I feel like I know enough about various components to have some confidence in like, okay, this is what it's going to look like. With VC, for example, I loved the first 3 months. It was really fun hearing all these ideas, meeting all these people, visiting different places, going to conferences. I did my first startup competition, judging. Like, there were just a lot of like new fun things. But then when I think about, okay, 10-year return horizon to figure out, like, did you actually do a good job? What is this, in the like 3-year time frame, the types of investments and the repeat in terms of the topics and ideas. It was at really like the 5 or 6 month mark that I was like, like this is a lot of chasing deals. This is a lot of like just, shallow level networking, which as an introvert, I'm an introvert, like it's not grateful. And these events where I'm there for 5 hours talking to people get exhausting when you're doing it like the third or fourth time. I think the beginning was fun, but it took a couple of iterations for me to say, okay, this is the primary part of the job. It's not what I'm best at. I think I could be okay at it, and I might even be decent at it, but it's not something that plays to my strengths and, what I enjoy doing.
Are you familiar with the concept of a zone of genius, or like the zone of excellence, zone of genius? There's a
I've
book
heard
called
of
The
the
Great Leap.
concept. Yes.
One of my takeaways from that book is that a lot of people end up getting tempted to stay in their zone of excellence, which is what they're really good at. But in reality, you want to kind of like the ultimate form of success from like a self achievement perspective and self actualization perspective is like maximizing the time you spend in your zone of genius, which is that thing that is a level further. And it sounds like
Mhm.
there's a
And
lot
the
of things
difference
I'm
in
sure
zone
you
of
could be really
the
good at.
difference in zone of genius and zone of excellence is that the zone of genius are things that you actually really enjoy doing, right? And that no one else can do. Is that
It's like the
the subtle
zone.
difference?
So a lot of people are like, here's an example. UA could be her zone of excellence, I'm sure, includes being an incredible chief product officer. And I would not doubt that UA would be an incredible CEO too, if you wanted that job. So I think that probably would fall in your zone of excellence. But the genius, like, are you the best person in the world to be like, are you the one that's designed to be a CEO because it like fulfills every fiber in your body? Doesn't sound like that is the case, right? So you'd maybe like there would always be a little part of you that's probably reluctant or questioning whether you're doing what you should be doing in that role. Whereas I don't think we haven't talked about your coaching practice yet, which we should absolutely get to because I think that's in your more in your zone of genius. But something tells me you're not questioning whether that is tuned to your deepest kind of essence in a way, and that's more of a genius thing.
Interesting.
I don't
What
know.
do you think is Mark's zone of excellence and potential zone of genius?
We've talked about that, right? Like we've talked about some of the stuff that you feel is more of a drag, but you're good at it, Mark. And then there's other stuff that you feel like really energized by and you want to take other things off your plate so that you could do these things that give you more energy. That's the distinction I would think of. So what comes to mind, Mark? What's something that you're really good at that you feel like you get dragged into doing?
I'm curious what you think.
I think my impression of you is that you are extremely good at establishing playbooks and kind of like establishing processes for getting things done. And then you like to optimize or create like the standard operating procedure for those things and get them off your plate as soon as possible. Cause I think you get excited about figuring the thing that works out. But then once it's kind of repeat, like rinse, lather, repeat, I think you probably get less energy from the mundane, if I had to guess. Is that resonating?
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty spot on. I really enjoy like taking something and making it like repeatable, um, and really optimizing every small step along the way. And I think I enjoy staying with it and doing the mundane until I feel like I've already reached that maxima where I'm like, okay, like maybe like now what I'm getting is very marginal or incremental. But I really enjoy that journey of just taking something that's maybe, and I think the shadow side of that is that sometimes I like to lead with that, or start with the system rather than like get it going and then just see what happens. And then once we've gotten enough data points and repetition, then turning it into a system. So trying to
Yeah.
not flip the order.
Yeah. You don't want to build a system for the local maxima without trying to see how big could this get and then building a system for the bigger thing. But it does sound like you enjoy systems, building systems. And whenever someone says the phrase standard operating procedure, I like secretly flinch a little bit. I hate them. I started my career at McKinsey, and I think for some reason I associate that term with like, I don't know, corporation. Big corporations. So every time someone says that, I'm like, yeah,
Well, and
don't
here's
make me
why.
follow one.
And here's why it's a superpower for Mark, though, is because in order for Mark to scale what he's doing right now, and I'm starting to think about applying this way of thinking for my stuff too, but for things to scale without Mark having to work 60, 70, 80, 90, there's a ceiling to how many hours Mark can
Right.
work. And if he wants to grow
Yeah.
the impact of Supra and grow, and I'm sure there's more things Mark wants to do outside of just Supra. So in order to plug people into the system, those people are going to need some habitable environment to operate in,
Holding.
right?
Mhm.
And I think that so Mark, my observation is that you've been able to plug people into your team and they can run the playbooks that you've come up with because you're good at creating that habitable order that allows people to like be really clear on how to do a good job on something. And then you're also flexible to giving them agency to help evolve the playbook based on what they learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think sometimes the thing that I'm working on is like, how can I co-create those systems with people so then they feel more ownership over it? Because I think sometimes what happens is I'll create the systems, but then they don't feel like they own it. And then
Mhm.
that means that every time there's needs to be a change or something, like I need to get involved or I need to be the one who like, oh, like we're touching Mark's baby. Like, is that
For
okay?
sure.
Yeah. What about you, Ben? What do you think are your strategies?
I think hyper presence in what I'm doing is probably like something it's a theme in my life. Like whatever I'm doing, I'm giving it my full attention and everything else is just
Mhm.
completely gone. And I think that can be a superpower because I'm realizing that not a lot of people can offer that, like hyper presence. And then when I'm actually working on things, I just get deeply into them and follow my curiosity until it's done, or like really satisfactory. And then I ship and I can focus on something else. So I think that's my strength. The shadow of that is because I love to be in the thing I'm doing, it's hard for me to sometimes zoom out and ask the strategic question around like, is getting this email I'm about to send to 3,000 people on my course waitlist to be like a 10 out of 10 instead of a 9 out of 10, a good use of the next 30 minutes of my time? Like I'm probably not as strategic
Mhm.
as I want to be with those kind of moments. So yeah, I don't know. What have you observed?
Sounds like you're a bit of a crafts person. Like you want the quality to be there in what you're doing, even if it's just an email.
I do. My take is I'm sure you've all experienced this, but imagine like walking into a coffee shop that just inspires. Like you look around and you're like, every detail in here has been thought through. And Mark, I think we have a book club that we're about to do for Supra around the what is it, unreasonable hospitality, something
Yeah.
like that. I haven't read it
Let
yet,
us in.
but like
Yeah.
the immediate image that came into my mind is I'm going to love this book because it seems like it's going to be about going above and beyond to creating an
Mhm.
environment that's going to make someone feel something that is unique to you. So yeah, I think of this podcast as a form of self-expression, and Mark and I have chosen to sometimes not publish things that weren't up to our standards. And we've also chosen, I think, to brand this podcast in a certain way that feels authentic to us. And so my course is another avenue for that. We talked about this last time, but if I can't create a course that I'm proud of from a quality perspective, that people genuinely feel good like paying me for, I'm not gonna create a course at all. Like
Yeah.
so I think it's quality over quantity and what I'm doing, or at least that's a good way of describing the craft part of what energizes me.
Yeah. And I think from my point of view, like I would totally agree. I think with the observation, I think that the craft is your superpower. And I think the way you can do that, you have two tools at your disposal that I think are very effective. One is like just setting the right boundaries for you to be able to focus on that craft. I think you're really good at like communicating, be like, hey, you want to do it this way. I don't think I'm going to be able to do it, or here's what I'm going to need. I'm very, very, very good at that. And the other one too is like, I think you really try to always get to the truth. And I think sometimes that's a really high energy thing to do, but you're always like trying to get to like why. You're all asking the extra why, right? Of like, why is that? Or you're almost like asking questions to understand and get to the truth rather than like to get things going, which I think that's also, I think, allow you to build something that's very pure, very honest. I don't know if that makes sense.
It does. And I appreciate you seeing that in me. And yeah, I don't want to turn this into a Ben coaching or therapy session, but yeah, we could go deeper. Just because, yeah,
I
go
see a
ahead.
theme here with UA. Just trying to turn.
No, I don't turn all conversations into coaching conversations.
I think this was our intention when we started this conversation. So I think we're living up to it. And not to unorganically throw the ball back at UA, but where my curiosity has taken me, just in the spirit of what we're just talking about, is I feel like we got to the point in your journey where you had the idea to like write a book. And what I'm itching to know is the book thing one of those things that as you started to give it your attention and your energy, it was one of those things that you got more excited by the more you've invested into it, or did it also start to feel like a drag at any point?
So it was definitely one of those things that got more interesting as I got more into it. So it actually didn't start out as a book. It started out as my husband actually being like, hey, you've done a lot of coaching since 2016, like, nights and weekends. So if you want to do more of this coaching thing, maybe think about what are some learnings you've had from your coaching sessions. And maybe that will help you think about like what types of coaching you want to do or how you can help others. So it actually just started as a Google Doc of me dumping stories from past coaching experiences and my own stories, like almost like reflecting back on my own career. And I think most people don't do this, where they start from the beginning and they say what happened, and they actually try to weave a story together. Where did I get stuck? Where did I, what did I do? What happened? What worked? What didn't work? And that's how it started. And then at some point, the Google got really long. I shared it with a few friends and they were like, wow, this is like really interesting. You should make this a book. And my first reaction to that was like, no, I don't write books. Like, I'm an engineer by training. And then I was in product. I'm a math person. I don't write books. In fact, my mom wanted me to be a writer when I was growing up. And I repeatedly was like, I'm not a writer. I'm not a writer. Like, I do fine on my tests and whatnot, but I'm not a writer. I think I had that narrative in my head as I was doing this too, where people were like, hey, maybe you should consider writing a book. And I was like, I'm not a writer. I don't write books. That was the end of the conversation. And then at some point, I was talking to a friend of mine who had just written a book. And she was like, okay, fine. So you're not a writer. That doesn't mean you can't write a book. I was like, what do you mean? She was like, well, you can just use it as a marketing tool. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I could do marketing. Like, I need to do marketing if I want to do a business. And she was like, just think of it as writing a marketing campaign or like a growth PRD, like in your language, right? I was like, okay, I can maybe go down that path. And so that was what got me over the hurdle, was to like completely reframe what it was rather than, oh, it's a novel that people will read, into a maybe a bit more superficial and businessy, but like, this is your marketing channel. This is why people will talk to you. And I'm like, okay, I can understand that. But then I think when I actually got into the process, so I did some research around like going with publishers, large ones, medium ones, and then self-publishing, and learned a lot of really interesting things, decided to self-publish. And so as I learned more about what the process to publish a book was like, I got more interested actually in the creation of a book. Less in the writing part, just like how a book is made from beginning to end and what the different options are. And I think it became a thing I was building. And so after it became a thing I was building, that was when I latched onto the idea of like, oh, now I'm making a thing. And instead of a software product, it's a book. It's like a physical thing that I can hold. And so it was like I hired by contractors, freelancers, brought people together, figured out the process, figured out all the requirements. And so it became more fun as it became less about just let me make a novel and more about let me create this product that maybe people will find useful. Um, and in the process, I discovered that I do like writing. So, I now write a newsletter on a regular basis. And part of the reason that I should keep that up is I do find joy in writing. And because I think it helps me think. It helps me think and it helps me make sense of things that I've heard over time, recent, or, from history. And writing is a great way for me to bring that together and hopefully in a way that helps others. So yeah, it's one of those things that I enjoyed more as I went along, and it's something that I hope to keep doing into the indefinite future.
And how long did it take you to write the book end to end?
4 months. So
Oh, wow.
I started in September and I think I published the book mid-January. It was very fast. I think on the order of writing books, it was very fast. Yeah, I sat at a cafe for, I don't know, 3-4 hours a day, maybe a bit more for the writing. And then another like couple of hours on table of content, finding people to do the book cover, figuring out what actually needed to happen in what order. What happens when you don't have a full-time job as a product executive and you spend all of your time on book writing. Yeah.
And then I'm curious, how did the hypothesis of this is going to be a good marketing tool pan out? Have you noticed like a big difference? And also like, how do you even do marketing for a book? Like, how did you know
Yeah.
where to release it, who to release it to?
Yeah. So I didn't. When I got started, I knew nothing about marketing books or books in general. I got to, and I think my approach generally when I don't know how to do something is to just see if I can find people who have done it and ask them a lot of questions. And so, luckily for me, I had a couple friends in my network who had recently published books, whether it was like traditional publisher or self publishing. And they gave me, like, hey, this is what I did, this is what worked, this is what didn't work. And they gave me ideas around, like, hey, here's how you might be able to do some of these things. And I just tried some of them out. I think you'll find this a common theme in what I do. I just tried it and see if it worked. And if it worked, then I did a little more. And if it didn't, then I did a little less. And a lot of it really was built upon the network of people who I got excited to be a part of this book writing journey. I would have never thought this going in, but apparently people like to be a part of other people's book writing journey. And so when you tell someone they're writing a book, they want to be, I created a Slack channel and everybody was in there, like highly engaged, like wanting to read parts of the book, give me feedback, vote on book covers, vote on name. So that was
And these
how,
are just like
yeah,
random. These are just random people that were in product, or they're also like people that were writing their own books that wanted to help out.
a vast combination of. So it started with just people that I knew, like friends and coworkers, and then they would tell their friends, and those friends would join. And then I think at some point I posted on LinkedIn when I was like further down the process that I was writing a book, and then more people joined that I didn't really even know. And then they would connect me to other people who are like, I'm thinking about writing a book. Can I be a part of the process? So it was definitely a mix, but it definitely went from like, I didn't think anybody was interested to, wow, a lot of people are interested in this. And that was a very surprising discovery for me. But it really did also keep me accountable to like, okay, now I need the next step of the process because now there's other people involved that I need to like, that want to see progress and I need to like make something happen.
Yeah, and I guess the cool part about that too is that now you have this engine of people that once you launch the book, they also want to advertise it and share it with their networks
Yeah.
because they've been so involved. Like they almost feel like I was like the parent of this baby too, in a way, or maybe the fun uncle, right? If you will.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. Getting people bought into your journey and your narrative and the building process is surprisingly a very powerful tool. Like, not something that I would have immediately thought about, but it makes sense in hindsight. And one of the biggest things about launching a book is getting those first couple of reviews, so that it's not like, 0 stars, no reviews. Everybody's like, what is this? And sort of generating that tiny bit of credibility on Amazon or wherever to be like, okay, this is like somebody found the thing useful. And building that group of people mostly to actually just generate reviews was one of the critical steps, starting points for getting the book off the ground. That said, I still don't think I'm doing a fantastic job at using it as a marketing tool. I think it does open conversations and bring a lot of credibility when you say, hey, I've written a book on this topic. But at the same time, it's not an A/B test. It's not like I could say like, hey, the Yui that didn't write a book, would she have gotten the same conversations or interest? I have no idea, right? And so I only know this version of the story, and it's been very helpful. I don't actually know what the B version looks like.
yeah. Do you have a sense of like the percentage of clients that end up working with you? Like, how many of them did read the book before, and that was like one of the reasons why? Yeah.
I feel like it's a very high percentage. I've never actually asked. I want to say it's probably more than 60%.
Oh wow.
Yeah, it's pretty high, especially if they don't know me before or didn't come through a referral. So if it's like off the internet, most people, I think, eventually end up reading my book before they reach out. But I don't know if they would have reached out if they didn't have the book. But a lot of them
Mm.
start with like the newsletter, or they see some webinar I did, or they hear about me somewhere, or they read a LinkedIn post, and then they find out more and they find my book. So then they go read the book. So that's why I think it's such a high percentage by the time they get to like this big investment of coaching, that they've read the book, because the book is $20 versus thousands of dollars for coaching. But I don't know whether they, again, would have taken that step if there wasn't that book in the middle.
Yeah, because that's something that I think a lot about for this podcast, right? Like, I'm sure some people that join Supra have listened to the podcast. There's not a lot of people that have like said they do, but I'm sure like it's a great way to build trust in a way, right?
Right.
If they're like, if they listen, they know, like, a lot of our guests that we have are people who have been in who are Supra members, who have been in the podcast before. They share what they're doing, what they're getting out of the groups. I think there's definitely like this trust that you build when you share like long form content, and you have the opportunity to share how you think and how you express yourself. So I think there's definitely something there. I'm also
Yeah.
curious. I think there's something like there's a lot of wisdom to something you said of like that it can be really powerful to basically welcome people into your journey and kind of like make them like almost like participants of it. And I think that's what it made me think about is I don't do that often enough. I think there's all these like people in my life, like from mentors to previous managers to friends, that I've just maybe I'm not giving them updates on what I'm doing and on the project that I'm working on. And I feel like there's an opportunity there for me to do that, because I think then you never know who can help or who is excited about your journey and what that can lead to. So I'm curious, is there anything that you do as you're like in this like portfolio career to keep people on the loop of, okay, here's what I'm doing and here's how you can help?
Yeah. It's a great question, and I'm not good at it either. I used to regularly send Christmas cards, and now I don't even do that. Now it's like a short email with a couple of photos attached. But I still try to do it once a year.
It's a good MVP.
I think that two thoughts. One, if it's like an indefinite journey, then it also becomes harder. I think part of the reason the book journey was interesting was because people knew there was a beginning and an end. And it wasn't going to be like 5 years later, like Yui is still on this journey, right? Versus like if you think about like a career or something, like if I want people to follow along with my coaching business journey, like that's like an indefinite thing, hopefully, right? And so that can be a bit more challenging because they're like, okay, I don't know how much I'm going to have to invest in this, versus a book journey, people are like beginning to end, like I know what it's gonna look like. It reminds me of Silicon Valley, like when you watch the eagles hatch from the nest, right? You know how long you're watching that for. The eagle's gonna hatch and then you're done, right? But it's interesting to follow the journey. But I think the endpoint is actually having a clear endpoint is actually a critical piece of that. And so I'm relatively better at keeping people updated when it's a bit more of a short thing where there's a very clear end to what I'm doing. So I tried it again. So I did it with the book, and then I tried it again with building my leadership accelerator, which was like, as we've alluded to, I was doing some teaching on Reforge and then Maven, and I was like, just want to build my own thing and see if it works. And so I took the same approach of let me bring people along from my previous classes and clients and folks who are maybe interested, and I brought them along as a part of the journey for building the accelerator. And then when the accelerator launched, they were like done, right? They helped me like promote it a bit, and then they were done. And so I feel like it's much more tangible and approachable when you can give people chunks of things to hang on to and then kind of have like a celebration at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the counter like narrative, but I guess a little bit different. It's like the classic like investor updates of like, you do like
Heck yeah.
you do them like, and startups can be there for like 10 years or 12 years. I'm like almost trying to think, yeah, for my journey, right? It's like I don't know how long I'm gonna be in this journey. Like it could be like 3 more years, could be 4, could be 10, could be 20. But also I think like the way maybe the vision stays the same, but like the different strategies that I'm trying are changing. So that's also why I'm thinking of like how can I maybe keep people involved in a project that's more, unclear for how long is it gonna go. But
My observation is that people chronically underestimate how interesting the mundane parts of their current journey are to other people. Like if I were to just read a random snapshot of how things are going for you right now, I am sure that would be interesting content to me as someone who wants to follow your story, even if it's not anchored to a specific time boxed project or initiative. Even though you might see it as something that is less interesting or it's maybe harder to anchor into. And Mark, the same is true for you. And there's always a voice, at least in my head, when because I have a newsletter, like a Substack, and I write like life updates maybe once or twice a year and just tell people what I'm up to. It's not in the context of a specific project or anything. And the voice I have to overcome in my head is like, this is not interesting. Like, this is not something that is valuable content. It's just me talking about normal things in my life. And when people respond to that, I find that they are like, I'm so happy to hear what you're up to. Here's what I've been up to. It's like you're almost just like giving them permission to like keep you apprised on what's going on in their life. And so that's one way I try to like get people to, bring them along on my journey, because I can't tell you where I'm heading. I don't have a 3-month goal or anything. Like I'm following my energy week by week, month by month right now. And I guess you're both part of that journey because we're spending time in the same circles. But I don't know if that resonates.
that does resonate. And I was thinking also, like, I think you did this article, I think it was like in December, where you like reflected of like your first year as like solopreneur. I was like, I remember reading that. I was like, that was so interesting of all your learnings. I think you even shared like some like financials, like things like that. And I thought I was like, I would read this every year. I think there's just a lot of wisdom in those type of posts, and the fact that someone took the time to reflect.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think for me, it's less that I don't think people will find it interesting because people watch eagles hatch from eggs. And there's plenty of people, I worked at Instagram, there are plenty of people, creators who literally just film their lives, right? And, many, many people watch what they do. What outfit are you wearing today? Really, there's a lot that you get surprised by. I think for me, it's actually less about, I don't think people will find it interesting. It's more about, I can't keep it up. I can do once a year. Like I can do a financial summary and share learnings once a year. But if somebody was like, Yui, I need you to share a bit of what you're doing every day, I'd be like, no, that is exhausting. It's like, I don't even tell my husband what happened every day. He doesn't even get a daily update. So I think for me, maybe similar to Mark, how you want to think about system, I do sometimes think about, okay, do I remotely imagine this being sustainable? And there are certain things where even very early on, like, nope, doesn't pass your threshold, like not going to start it because I don't think I can keep it up. And I almost didn't start my newsletter in that line of thinking because I was like, I don't know if I can commit to writing every week. And what got me over the hurdle was my editor for my book. She was like, well, why don't you just take your book and break it down into 52 posts? And then you have at least a year of material that you can always fall back on. And that safety net kind of helped for me to be like, okay, if I ever just like couldn't think of something to write, at least I have 52 entries. And that's a pretty interesting newsletter. And I didn't end up actually doing that at all. I think I published maybe 3 or 4 posts that were taken from the book more directly, and then it just became a more organic thing that I grew into. But I needed that safety net almost because that threshold was too intimidating for me just to think about I had to do this every week.
One question it's going through my head is, as I think about and just to make sure I'm clear, is coaching like what percentage of your just overall, let's consider it productive or career oriented part of
Mhm.
your life right now? What percentage of that pie chart is taken up by coaching versus like other things right now?
So probably 70%, like a large amount. It's what I spent. So I do one-on-one coaching, and now I've taken on a few corporate clients, one in Barcelona actually that I just started in the new year. And between those two things, that's probably 70% of my time. And then maybe another 20% on writing and the last 10% on Maven. I'm debating even that's going to be a thing going forward because I have so little time to spend on it. And I lump like the accelerator program in the coaching bucket, sort of into the one-on-one team corporate coaching. And I think that mix has shifted from last year because I'm indexing much more on what I love doing. And I'm just following, to your point of Ben, of following where my interest is and where my curiosity is. It's taking me way deeper into coaching and writing than any of the other directions.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. And it's also really exciting to hear. Do you use the 20% ish that go to writing to what's the relationship maybe between your writing time and the coaching time? Do you use writing to maybe kind of like digest some of what you're learning, / maybe even promote and market the coaching business? Or is there something else that you use the writing time for?
Yeah, there's definitely a marketing element of it where I think it's so important when you work with a coach and you make that investment to say, am I going to have similar philosophies, believe in similar things, feel this person can understand and empathize with what I'm going through? So I think the writing helps with that at scale. The other thing that I do with it is sometimes when I'm working through a difficult coaching challenge or I see the same challenge across multiple clients, it's helpful to pull those threads together and to say, okay, what's a common theme? And how would you actually address the sort of bigger question? And there are times where I would be on a coaching call and we will work through something together. And then I have 4 other ideas, right? So it's kind of like, let's put it into a post and I'll share it back with the person. Like we talked about the first two, but here are some other things you might even want to think about. So I use it as a pretty flexible way to reflect and then to aggregate and share broader concepts. So yeah, I guess a little bit of everything in short to help me piece together the conversations that I'm having.
I'm curious, if you're generalized, what are like the top 3 topics that come out of your coaching calls? What would you say they are? And maybe like how have they changed over the last maybe year?
Interesting question. I don't think they changed much in the last year. I will answer that first. I think that for the most part, actually since 2016, there's some very common themes that I see across different people's struggles, especially when they first come to coaching. There's usually like a moment or some challenge that they're dealing with. They're like, hey, I want to look for a coach. And that tends to be very similar triggers for people. One is I feel stuck. Like, hey, I want to be growing in my career. I tried these different things. I was maybe up for a promotion and it didn't happen. And now I don't know what to do. I don't know what I did wrong. I don't know what I should do differently. There's no one here to help me. I feel stuck and I don't know where to go. That tends to be a very common one. Another common one is I'm super busy. I'm going to be burnt out. There's too much going on, but I don't know how to focus. Like, I don't know I don't even have time to think about where I should focus, but I know I need help. I need somebody to help me with, I'm just doing too much and I don't know where I'm going. And then the last one tends to be something is not working in my organization or my team. I don't know how to fix it. It's usually, hey, the team is not shipping fast enough. The team is not motivated. We're not shipping the right things. These people are not getting along. Like, and I don't know how to fix it. Like, I want help fixing it. And there's a very small bucket of people because it's become much more popular, I think, in Silicon Valley and in the US, where they're like, my friend had a coach. He said it was awesome, or she said it was awesome. I feel like I'm at a stage in my career where having a coach would help. I don't have like a specific, one of those buckets, but like this person I look up to said that I should look into this. So like, I want to see what it's about.
And do you find like the reasons why people find themselves in that situation are pretty similar across the board? Because I've heard that, right? Of like, I'm not getting promoted, or I don't have time to focus, or something is not working, right? Like I almost wonder, like, how are you seeing the reason for why that's happening to be very similar across different people, and they're just articulating the problem in different ways?
It's like how you would think about relationship issues. There's all these, I don't know how much you guys go into like therapy and relationship issues, but there's these like frameworks for like why couples don't get along, why they argue, 5 love languages, all these like different frameworks, which are true in general. So I think the same applies to careers, where you could kind of put it into these buckets of things where it's about more influence, it's about better communication, it's about like better relationships, it's about not being a company that's growing or like an area that's growing and the investment's going somewhere else. You can generalize, but that's the extent at which it applies. And so the thing that I sometimes struggle with in my writing is that it could feel generic. Like once I start generalizing what you should do, it feels generic because it's like, build better relationships, build trust. Like, people are like, what the heck? What does that mean? And so I think part of why I love coaching so much is because when you get one level deeper, it is a very unique problem of the person and their strengths, their weaknesses, their mindset, how they view the world, the entire history of their professional career and upbringing, and then the environment they're in, like the company, the people. And there's no two people that I would say, oh, they have the same problem, or like the exact same problem, and the way to solve it is exactly the same. I almost think of it, I don't know how familiar you guys are with Chinese medicine, but there's like hundreds and thousands types of herbs, right? And when someone comes in and says, I had this issue, you grab some combination of those herbs to be like, hey, like this might make you feel better. And then over time, you need a different combination of herbs to maybe solve a slightly different problem until that person is quote unquote completely healthy again, until they get sick again. And so coaching feels a little bit like that, where yes, there's probably finite combination, but it's actually a lot about figuring out the right combination, but also getting them to trust you enough to actually listen to what you are saying. Because there's an element of people asking, why can't AI be coaches? Right? I'm like, but do you listen to an AI when it tells you like, hey, do this, don't do that? And we make it to a point where that's true. But right now, that trust and interpersonal aspect is so important in that relationship building to get the person to actually change what they're doing or think about something in a different way. That's a large part of the equation as well.
You could potentially train like a bot on all your book and your posts and for your frameworks, and maybe that would be a more helpful
I have.
AI bot.
I have.
You have.
I have a project that has my book, all my writings, transcripts from some of my coaching calls. And once in a while, well, yeah, almost somewhat regularly, I'll ask a couple questions and see what it says and ask it a couple more questions. It's not there yet. Like, it's not at a place where I'm like, oh, I think somebody could actually benefit from this. My bar may also be too high as a product person, but in my subjective opinion, it is not there yet. But maybe one day it can be very helpful in between sessions and to give people something to use, like, in between.
Yeah, I think the space is so broad. I recently built a Copilot, but the space is narrow. There's like a clear set of, things. If you can give it a very contained space and you have things you keep repeating, then it actually learns to operate within that space, I think, pretty well. But given the things that you coach, it's so wide, right? Like then
Right.
it goes back to your childhood and like who you are as a person outside of this specific conversation. So I think that's a little harder, or
Yeah,
much
or
harder,
even-
I should say.
Yeah, like I think back to the best coaches that I've worked with, and I feel like what they're really good at is like one, asking the right questions, like almost like being really good at prioritizing. Like, here's the question that I need to ask next, and then also like kind of like thinking like there's all these different branches you could go down, but they're just really good at pushing me in the branch that matters most. And I think that's maybe for simple questions, be like, hey, like I have this problem. What is the framework? Maybe it can be really good at that. But
Sure.
if you want to peel the onion, I don't know if a bot's going to be really helpful there.
Yeah. It's interesting because when you watch coaching conversations, I don't know if you guys ever watched a coaching conversation. Most often, a question like an observer would have would be like, "Why did the coach pick on that thread?" Because the person will say like, 3 things, 5 things, whatever's on their mind, and the coach will be like, "This path," and the observer will be like, "Why do you pick that path and not the other one? Like he said 4 other things. Why didn't you go down the other path, right? How do you know this was the right path?" And one of the challenges is you don't know whether that's the right path. And you don't know what is behind the other 4 doors. And so when I think about I sometimes think about that question of like, could they have gone down the other 4 paths too and like told me like where they all lead? So that's like where it gets interesting for me is you can pick one path. And to your point, Mark, like a good coach has a high chance of picking the best door, but they don't always pick the best door. And so, can Gen AI help with that of being like, oh, maybe here's what the other options may have looked like, playing out the conversations. I think the other challenge is like it's so specific to individuals that you would need to know a lot about the client too. So not just me, but also whoever it is that I'm coaching. And so to have that two-way conversation to figure out what's behind door number 2 and 3, and that's hard, right? Like you just don't have the data of the other person.
Yeah, it's almost like you would have to get really good at onboarding that all, like teaching that person how to onboard all the content. So it seems
Give
like
me
you
your
have that
life history.
exactly, and how to do that in an efficient way. And even there's also like the organizational context of tell me about your manager, tell me about your stakeholders, tell me about your reports, tell me about the culture of your company. And I feel like, yeah, if you had to capture the right details in a way that's efficient, I think that's also probably like a little bit of an art.
I want to go back to what you guys just said though, because I did pick up like if someone says 5 things and the coach picks one of them to go deep on.
Mhm.
Okay. I used to listen a lot to this podcast called the Reboot Podcast, which was Jerry Colonna. I don't know if you know Jerry Colonna and Reboot. It's a leadership coach based out of Boulder, Colorado. Anyway, it was the first podcast I found that had all these live coaching sessions recorded, and I got a ton of value out of listening to those. And my takeaway after listening to probably dozens of those is that what makes Jerry such a great coach, Jerry Colonna, is that I think he picks. It's almost like each of those doors could lead to a certain amount of depth,
Mhm.
and it's almost like he has developed a sense of taste and intuition about which of those doors is most likely to lead to a deeper process of discovery.
Mhm.
And that's the one that I think he goes after. So at least that's
Mhm.
kind of what and I think that is skill, that is intuition, that is things that come from years and years of experience. And you could argue it's a form of wisdom is being able to
Mhm.
pick that door, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when it comes to some of the more, because a lot of the coaching I do is also in the realm of product leadership, engineering leadership, places that I've been and seen. And so there's also an intuition around saying this may be the piece that you're missing. Like of
Mm.
all the different pieces that you're complaining about, those are all problems and they're all valid. But the one that you really need to solve that will give you the highest ROI is this one. It doesn't mean the others aren't problems. It just means you want to start with this one because it's either the hardest or, the one that'll give you the most bang for your buck next. And, you kind of go down the order to figure out what the next conversations need to look like.
That actually resonates a lot for what I do in my interview coaching, because interview coaching, there's often like a puzzle that I'm assembling in my head for like what this person's already really good at and which parts they seem to not be getting or not clicking, like what's the missing piece. And if I can try to like orient the conversation towards that missing piece as we identify it, then
Right.
theoretically that's the optimal place to spend time together. But you
Yeah.
can't really get there without that diagnosis part.
Or having it done before for a long period of time and like master the role or the action itself, which is interesting. I feel like there's a lot of like product people and product leaders that have coaches but don't have a product background. And I
Yes.
wonder, hearing you speak about it, I'm like, I don't know in what world I would prefer someone that doesn't have a product background. Curious, like from your experience, have you ever had a coach that that you worked with that maybe was really helpful for your career, but and wasn't, that did not have that product background? And if so, like, what was the benefit, or how is that different
Yeah.
from someone who had a product background?
Yeah, so I definitely had amazing coaches who helped me in my career. Wouldn't have made the leap from Thumbtack to Instagram, would not have made the leap from Meta to the CPO role. I wasn't even going for a CPO role. And my coach was like, why not? I was like, okay, why not? Good question. So I think I give part of the reason why I'm in coaching was because it was so amazing and effective being on the other side for me. And I worked with Katia Versa. She works with a ton of tech leaders. And even though she's not a product person, I think she was a lawyer by training. She has worked with enough tech clients that she knows how Meta operates. This is how startups operate. These are the types of challenges that like leaders in tech tend to deal with. So she's built that intuition through her coaching practice. And so I do think it can be difficult to work with a coach who doesn't have any context into or like intuition for the type of environment that you're in and the type of challenges that you're facing, because there's just too many nuances that you don't have time to just tell them. Like, I can't download my brain into your brain yet. So there's too many nuances, right? And so having someone who can kind of intuit, oh yeah, you're at Meta, this is what Meta generally like, or hey, you're at a fast growing startup, this is what it's usually like. No surprise, they don't actually have levels or any kind of promotion ladder. Like, being able to intuit those things, I think is quite useful. But I don't think you have to have worked necessarily in that particular job. Um, but I do think, like, looking for someone who can have that intuition is really valuable. Versus, I have worked with some coaches for short stints where it's just like, I felt like they weren't getting it. Like, they weren't getting what I was trying to explain, and therefore what they were trying to do to help wasn't as helpful.
And that makes a ton of sense to me. I'm just imagining, what it would be like to try to coach, I don't know, like someone that runs a restaurant. I don't know. I've never run a restaurant. I don't know what that business is like. So it probably makes no sense for me. But if I coached hundreds of people that run restaurants, then maybe without having run a restaurant of my own, I could start to be a good restaurant coach,
Mhm.
right? Something like that. I'm curious to go back to, you said earlier that one of those buckets of themes that people talk to you about is I feel stuck.
Mhm.
Have you learned anything about are there any generalities or common themes for how people get unstuck?
I think the biggest thing is usually about reframing their mindset. So I think you probably have heard this in other contexts, but like, as humans, there's lots and lots of things that signals that are coming our way on a regular basis, right? And we filter most of them out because your brain cannot process everything that's coming at you. And so you actually have these filters for what you pick up on, what you notice, what you don't notice, what you hear, what you don't hear, that are very subconscious, developed over just years of you being on this planet and figuring out, like, what do I need to pay attention to just stay alive and get food and all those things. And a very similar situation happens in the work environment. Most people get to a place where they have all these filters for subconsciously for what they pick up on, what they notice, what they don't notice, what they like spend extra time on, that they're just not aware that there's other possibilities. And so one of the first sort of thought processes that I like to go through with coaching is, what are those filters that you're using? And what are those things that you're noticing? And are the things that you're telling yourself really true? And someone may say, like, oh, I never recognize for my work. Nobody ever recognizes for my work. And then I would ask them, can you, for the next 2 weeks, write down every time someone recognizes you for something? And if that's zero, then agree, right? But more often than not, when they start trying to notice, hey, is somebody recognizing me, they actually start writing stuff down. They're like, actually, I never noticed, but like, actually, I do get a lot of appreciation from like this team. I just don't really process it. I kind of like, because it's not a part of the tape that's playing in my head. And so a lot of it is about figuring out what that filter they have is, and is there a different way of noticing or sensing the environment that they're in. It's usually not sufficient, but it's the starting point for, okay, how can we go somewhere different from where you are?
It almost sounds like those filters feed those limiting beliefs that people may
Mm-hmm.
have, right? And
Right.
without like opening those filters up, like you cannot really start to question those limiting beliefs with actual data you can trust.
It's hard to understand sort of broad statements, right? They may say maybe a client would say like, hey, I have difficulty building trust with leadership. What does that mean? Right? Like, so it's like, what are their interactions? What are they like? If you tried that, how do these conversations go? How do those conversations go? More often than not, you actually have people realize, actually, I do have the trust of leadership. Actually, they are like trying to help me do these things. I have such a filter on that I'm not even noticing that they're trying to like help me. And so there's a lot that comes with this is the story I'm telling myself. So I find data points to validate the perspective that I have rather than actively trying to be like, what is this other story that I could tell? And is it true or not?
Yeah, I like to ask myself, how is the story I'm telling myself serving me? And sometimes there's stories that don't serve me. And
Mhm.
if it's like, well, why am I keeping it? I don't have to tell myself this story. There could be more productive stories helping me. But I think it's
Mhm.
hard to get that perspective, especially for like, I think people who can be overly critical or self-critical. The stories that seem to take root are probably the ones in which you're doing more, like more things are going wrong than going well. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's when I'm being really hard on myself, it's hard to bump up the weight that I give to the stories about what's good about what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, when you have a good coach, they start actively pushing in the other direction. And they say, Ben, what's a good story you can tell about yourself? Like, what's something you did really well? What's something that someone gave you thanks for? And they almost like force you to shine a light on that part and keep it in the forefront of your head rather than something that you just subconsciously pass through. And it can help change the narrative for you of who you are, what you're good at, what the possibilities are. And I think that's partly I always think about this phrase of like, you have to build a door for opportunity to knock. Like you have to see the possibility to even have the opportunity, right? Versus if you're like, no, it's not possible. I'll never move to Barcelona. I'll never write a book. I was kind of in that right side, like I'm not a writer. Then you don't see the possibility. I'm not a writer. I don't write books. So I would find more information to reinforce that narrative than to be like, oh, but could I write a book and why would I write a book?
Yeah. Whenever I'm stuck like in a similar place or I feel like I'm getting swallowed by negativity, I have a friend that I always call and he's always really good at, helping me push and like just going deep on like my limiting beliefs, like, hey, why do you feel that way and why is that? And then
Mm-hmm.
the other thing that's really helpful that he does is like picture like where you want to be in like 5 to 10 years. And then it's like, how can you start living that life tomorrow? And I think like that
Mm-hmm.
exercise of like, what are the actual things that you think are preventing you to get there? Or what are some of the constraints you're putting to yourself that are true? And then you realize, actually, wait, there's all these things that I can start doing today that
Mm-hmm.
that that don't have to wait that long. And I find
Yeah.
the cool thing about that exercise, not only you just go from like a bad situation, but you also end up feeling pretty energized. So, oh, actually, there's things that I can start doing then, which I feel like can be really effective to get me unstuck.
Yeah. Picking up on that idea of constraints, that ends up being another common sort of theme as well, is people perceive things as fixed constraints when they're not. And this is especially true as folks are going up the leadership ladder. You're not, you're more used to most things being constraints. And you don't realize as you move up more in the organization, actually nothing is really a constraint. And so if you don't have this habit of always questioning, is this really truly a constraint? Are there other ways of doing this at a bigger, higher level? That also tends to get people stuck where they're like, okay, I can't figure out a solution with this set of constraints because there isn't one. You kind of like worked yourself into a null solution. Okay. And so the coach can help you kind of broaden, like, is that a constraint? Is that like, are you sure that's a constraint? Like, and start questioning and broadening and seeing like, oh, if you open it up, there's more possibilities.
I could keep talking to you about this stuff for hours, if I'm honest. But I think we probably want to start wrapping up. So that flew by.
Yeah,
So for those
that
who
was
are just
fun.
listening, I did have to go on mute for a little bit because my daughter's home from daycare today. So we had to I had to chip in a little bit. But Yue, just as we're wrapping here, would love to give the audience one, a good idea for where they could follow what you're thinking about, what you're writing, and then two, how might they be helpful to you?
Sure. I think the best place to follow my thinking would be at my newsletter, The Uncommon Executive. It's on Substack. And how might they be helpful to me? I would love to hear the challenges that they're facing in their careers, in their professional lives, that them or people that they work with. And or I'd also love to hear stories and narratives of leaders, particularly women and minority leaders who have been good role models and they find inspirational. Because I think that's how most people learn is by example rather than frameworks. I love frameworks. I'm a product person. I was in strategy, but I think role modeling and just seeing someone go through something is a very powerful way to learn how to do something.
Amazing. And the best, we'll definitely share the link in our show notes. And then the best way to reach you would be replying to your emails on the newsletter or connect via LinkedIn.
Yes, you can reply to my emails from the newsletter or just DM me on LinkedIn. I'm very reachable.
Amazing. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye-bye. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with someone who you think would benefit from it as well. We really appreciate it. We'd also love a follow or a rating on Substack, Spotify, or YouTube. That's going to let other people find us. And if you have any topic recommendations for a future episode, please send myself or Mark a DM on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.